soon as it's uploaded.
100%. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank
Okay. Good morning, everybody. So obviously this morning's training, we're going to be looking at a company that owns a property, whether it is better for your client to take over the shares in the company, or is it more beneficial for the client to decide to buy the property out of the company. So obviously we'll understand that when the client buys the property from the company, in other words, he takes physical transfer of the property, you guys will be able to use your normal offer to purchase. But the minute that the client decides to take over the company itself, there will have to be what we call a sale of share agreement that will have to be drafted. And that agreement will have to be drafted by an attorney. It can't be drafted by you as an agent. And one of the reasons for that is obviously there's a lot of technical issues that has to be considered by both the seller and the purchaser when such an agreement is signed. One of such, shall we say, oh, there we go. Great. Thank you, Michelle. So just for information purposes, guys, you see there, I'm from the firm Botha Kutse Mapikula Attorneys, and I'm also a conveyancer and attorney at the firm Ramsamy Kutse. So obviously the slide has run past us there. So the first consideration that will have to be taken into account is the transfer duty. And that obviously, if the client takes transfer of the shares itself, the old days, the clients used to say, well, then there's no transfer duty. But SARS actually amended the Act, Section 11B of the Transfer Duties Act now confirms that a property transfer or the transfer of shares in a property owning company can, in a residential property, be payable transfer duty on that transaction. And that means that there is no more the benefit where the client saves on transfer duty. There are exemptions to that rule, though, for argument's sake, agricultural property, because it's not residential. The Transfer Duties Act, that amendment purely stipulated that it is in connection with residential properties. The other consideration your client will also have to take into account is the capital gains tax issues. Now, obviously, if the capital gains tax is in a private individual name, then the act or the amount has now been increased. It's now 3 million. It used to be 2 million. Of your capital gain in your property will be capital gains tax exempt. If the property is in the name of the company, then obviously you won't have that exemption and you will pay capital gains tax from Rand 1. What also has to be considered by the seller is that even though there might not be capital gains tax in the sale of the property because the property is not being transferred, the shares are being transferred, there is capital gains tax on the transfer of the shares. And that capital gains tax is still calculated exactly the same as what we will calculate it with regards to the property transaction. And that is obviously the gain is the selling of the shares amount less his input that he had when he originally bought those shares from the company or in the company. Another situation that the client may also have to consider is that he might get free from having to pay transfer duty, but then there will be security transfer tax for those shares that will have to be transferred from himself as the seller of those shares, then to the purchaser. So to give you an example on the sale of the shares versus the sale of the property itself. So in this first scenario, we here deal with where the property is being sold, not the shares. So you'll see we're working on a 5 million rand transaction. Please note that the transfer duty is calculated on the current transfer duty rate and not on the one that has been amended and that will come into play as of the 1st of April. So you'll see the transfer duty amount there is 456,000. The company then sells the property and there will be a capital gains tax inside the company on the profit of that sale. And what I mean by inside the company is that the company will pay the capital gains tax and the buyer will not need to pay any bond registration costs or transfer fees because he's taking sale transfer and not transfer of the property. I'll get back to the cost a little bit later as well. Scenario B, sorry, it jumped. Scenario B is where you are now selling the shares in the company. So not the property, but the actual shares. And you'll see here, there's again, the transfer duty is payable on the 456,000 transfer duty. And here the seller of the shares pays the capital gains tax. So not the company, but the seller himself, the owner of those shares. He pays the the capital gains tax. There's no physical transfer in the deeds office because the property remains that of the company. There will be no bond cancellation fees and obviously no bond registration fees, and all existing leases will continue to remain in place. We'll also speak a little bit about the leases later in the presentation. So then there's other considerations that your buyer and your seller will also have to take into account. You will know, obviously, in terms of a company, there's also loan accounts, and the shareholder is normally the one that takes possession of those loan accounts. In other words, the company owes him money. When the shares are being transferred to your buyer will then take over those loan accounts from the seller, and that will have to be ceded to your purchaser. Other liabilities that your purchaser must be aware of is like the company debts. So there's tax liabilities and risks associated with that. Remember, tax is not only income tax, but there might also be employees tax. There might be VAT returns outstanding, and all of that will have to be investigated by doing a proper due diligence test to ensure that you don't take over any unforeseen liabilities that you might not have thought of. When you take over the shares, it might assist you with estate planning, because now that property won't be part of your estate. It's an entity all by itself, even though you own the shares in the company. And should something happen to you as the owner of those shares, at least the property can still continue running. What is also important for estate planning is, should you, for argument's sake, get into financial difficulty, at least the creditors for your personal estate won't be able to attach the property, because you are not the owner of the property, you are only owner of those shares. So the advocacy for the benefits of taking transfer of the shares instead of the property is obviously, in certain circumstances, there won't be any transfer duty payable. But remember the 50% rule implemented by SARS, where they confirm that any share transfer where more than 50% of that company, the shares in that company, is being transferred to the purchaser, and the property, the company is what they call a property-rich company. In other words, more than 50% of its assets belongs in property, then there will be transfer duty payable on the transfer of those shares. So even though you might think that you are getting away with transfer duty, as we've seen, the SARS has actually put a block on those type of transfer with regards to residential properties, and your purchaser will have to pay transfer duty. Remember that even if a property is rented out, it is still a residential property, or if it is rented if it's a big building and there's a lot of units in that building, it's still used for residential purposes. So there will still be transfer duty payable on the transfer of that company. One of the other reasons is that they say that it's a quicker transfer process. I don't fully agree with that. In my personal opinion, it's not necessarily a quicker process, because your purchaser will have to now make sure that he does his proper due diligence, investigates the property and any debts that the property might have, looks at the financials, and obviously also look at the rental agreements that is in place with that, to make sure that those rentals will actually pass over to him. One of the other benefits is the continuity of contracts. So here your purchaser has got the added benefit that the lease agreements will remain in place. So too will your, for argument's sake, your cell phone accounts, as well as your fiber accounts, your rates and taxes account. All of that will continue to remain in the name of the company. So the company will obviously, you don't have to, once you take transfer, go and now apply for all of those new lines to be installed and so forth when you go, with regards to the property transaction. There is, however, still risks in the share transfer. As we've already hinted, there might be hidden liabilities, not only taxes, but other litigation, for argument's sake. So the company might have been involved in litigation, and that is then not advised to the purchaser. When the purchaser takes over the company, he takes over the company in total. In other words, he will now be the one that stands in your seller of the shares in his shoes, and he will be the one that's now liable for that litigation and any cost order or even an order by court for the damages that he was sued, for argument's sake, in a company where there's a vehicle that might have been in an accident. Then that charges or that damages claim will then rest in the company, which inadvertently will then rest on your purchaser of those shares. Financing of the purchase price can be difficult. We know that the banks these days, they don't even consider, in some instances, the sale of share transaction. They would rather be financing the purchase of the property itself. And if that is going to be a problem for your purchaser, where he might have to put in additional equity because he can't afford to purchase the shares in the company without having to apply for finance, then it might not be a good idea for the client to go this route. It might be better for him to actually rather take transfer of that property into another company where he's the only client, and then the bank will look at that transaction, or to take the transfer of the property in his own name. Also take into consideration, as we've mentioned, with regards to the capital gains tax, if the client takes the property into his own name, he's going to be residing there, then it would be best interest for the client to actually rather look at buying the property in his personal name, because then he gets that capital gains tax exemption. There will be ongoing compliance costs when he takes over the company. Those costs would be the CIPC the CIPC annual returns that has to be submitted. Obviously, also your purchaser will have to have annual financials done for the company, and then there's also the fact that he will now have accounting expenses, auditing expenses of those financials on an annual basis. And this is one of the biggest downfalls for me, is the costs for the due diligence. As we've mentioned before, the benefits is that there's no transfer costs involved, and the client might, if it's a commercial property, an agricultural property, he might not have to pay the transfer duty applicable, but he will have to do a costly due diligence exercise. And that due diligence exercise will not only be accounting wise, but he will have to get an attorney to actually look at all the agreements for the company to make sure that those agreements are still compliant and relevant, and that, whatever, if it's rental agreements, that the tenants are up to date. You will have to look at the tenant payment schedule to make sure that that is done. There's levy cost to be considered. There's also still the rates and taxes to be considered, and I would recommend that even if it's a share of sale transfer, that your purchaser in the agreement insists that the seller still provides him with a rates clearance certificate, because whatever is outstanding on that rates account will now be your purchaser's liability, and he will take over that liability to the town council. The thing with the financing of the purchase price to also consider is that, when there is a bond over the property, The nice of it is that the purchaser can continue making payment of that bond installment, so he won't have to apply for a new bond, and there won't then have to be a cancellation of that bond and registration of a new bond. But the bank will still have to change the surety applicable on that bond. Currently, that surety will most probably be the seller of the shares, who's standing surety. And if your purchaser takes over the company, he will have to stand in place of the seller as a surety with the bank. So the bank will still have to vet him to ensure that he is a proper person and can actually afford the property should the rentals not be paid in. So there can still be a hassle even if it is agreed that the finance will be taken over. There's still a possibility that the bank might not accept your purchaser as a surety in that agreement. So then in conclusion, obviously, as we've highlighted, that if it's a high-end property, there might be transfer duty savings applicable to your transaction, and your seller will save those costs. Your seller will have to obviously, your purchaser will have to obviously make sure that he does his proper due diligence to that there's no hidden liabilities that he did not account for. And for that, it's going to be quite costly because he will have to appoint attorneys and accountants or auditors to actually look at the financials of the company. And then very serious consideration for your clients is what will the intention be for purchasing this property? As I've mentioned, if he purchases the property purely as an investment, then yes, taking over of the shares might still be beneficial to him. But if he is going to reside in the property itself, then it would be better for him to actually take over to buy the property out of the company. By doing that, he will, as his primary residence, get the capital gains tax exemption, which he will not have should he take over the shares in the company. Another nice situation is that the contracts, like lease agreements, will continue running in the name of the company. So your purchaser will not have to go and re-sign lease agreements with all the tenants or sign session agreements with the tenants to now take over the contract from the company to him in his personal capacity or to him in another company that might be purchasing the company out of the property out of the company. So so that is in summary of what has to be considered when it comes to buying and selling of a property that's in a company, and to consider these issues, especially the tax issues for your client. And guys, if you don't know the tax implications, then you should rather advise your purchaser or your seller to consult with their accountants or their auditors. Do not try and give tax advice when you are not a tax practitioner. Even us as attorneys, we tend to stick to the basics. If the client wants additional tax advice, then we rather refer him to an attorney that specializes in tax law, or we refer him back to his accountant or his auditor to provide him with the necessary tax advice. Then something else that's not even part of the training, but I thought I'll just highlight that for you guys, and it has to do with appointment of attorneys. Or, when your purchaser and your seller agrees that a conveyancer has to be appointed, and it's a conveyancer that you don't know, or rather, let me rephrase it, when an attorney has to be appointed and it's an attorney that you don't know, please ensure that that attorney is indeed a conveyancer. We have had a number of incidents in the last 3 to 4 months where the one instance is where the purchaser insisted that his attorney assists him with the transaction because he would receive a discount from that attorney. Our officers, we were only doing the bond instruction, And after a lengthy transaction and not getting feedback from the attorneys, the the seller then approached us to say, can't we, as the bond attorneys, apply pressure on the transferring attorney to actually provide him with some information? We then made contact with the attorney, and something didn't look right, so we started doing an investigation. Because the attorney that was appointed was not the attorney that was actually attending to the transaction. It then transpired that he, obviously not being a conveyancer, then referred the matter to another law firm who is doing transactions or transfers. That attorney firm also did not have a conveyancer at hand. To make matters even worse is that both of those attorneys, the first attorney that was appointed was struck off the roll. So he was not registered with the Legal Practice Council anymore. The second attorney that was actually now attending to the transaction, his Fidelity Fund expired in December 2025. So now in February of this year, he was actually transacting illegally by still continuing to run a trust account when he's got no Fidelity Fund over that trust account, which meant that any money that paid into that trust account was not protected by the Fidelity Fund. So it was a severe problem for the seller, because he did not have a bond, and the full purchase price would have been paid into that attorney's trust account. Who knows what would have happened? Yes, they might have been above board and they might have paid him, but what if they did not pay him? The parties then agreed that obviously the matter can be moved over to our firm, so that we can continue with it and make sure that due compliance is being done. Another scenario was where the poor seller sold his property. The purchaser advised him that he works at an attorney firm. In this instance, the attorney was actually a conveyancer as well. That matter was then given to that attorney. The purchaser had to secure a bond. A bond grant through Nedbank was then obtained. The seller was in financial difficulties, so he requested bridging finance. The attorney, conveyancer, visited the client's residence for the bridging finance documents to be completed. The attorney saw the vintage motor vehicles that the seller had that was in the garage, and the attorney then said that because it is an unsecured transaction, they will take possession of those vintage vehicles until such time as the matter then registers and the funds are paid out to the attorneys for arranging the bridging finance. Obviously, attorneys were not allowed to do that, and that is what then prompted the seller to contact myself and asked if this is the way that bridging finance transaction is conducted. Further investigations were done, and it was then discovered that that bond grant was not even a valid bond grant. There was no such reference number on the Nedbank system, and it was all a scam. So the seller then, we cancelled that sale. Even though it was an invalid sale, we still followed the proper procedure to cancel that sale, and we could then secure a shall we say a valid sale agreement for the seller, so that the transaction can actually proceed. So that's just two of the transactions that we have had to deal with, where purchasers, both situations, try to use their own attorneys. So please, guys, be careful out there. Scams are on the rise, and the scammers have now discovered for a long time already, but it's becoming more and more, that property transactions houses a lot of funds that is being exchanged, and it is ripe for the picking. So please be careful when you do transact, and make sure that if your purchaser wants to appoint his own attorney, and even if the seller wants to appoint an attorney that you are not familiar with, that to protect both parties and yourself, because remember, you can't get commission on a fraudulent transaction, but then that you actually request just as we request from you your Fidelity Fund certificate, request the Fidelity Fund certificate from the attorney, and maybe go as far as to say that you could please request him to provide a letter of good standing issued by the Legal Practice Council. Thanks, guys. That concludes my training. Michelle, I can't change or I can't close